Subscribe to Echo Tales for deeply emotional, romantic, and mature stories that echo through your heart. Don't forget to like, share, and comment to support meaningful storytelling. Mira had always been the kind of woman who believed in quiet things, sunrises, handwritten letters, soft music in the background. She wasn't loud, she wasn't difficult. She was the kind of person who adjusted, who accepted, who smiled through the things she couldn't change. So when her parents arranged her marriage to Arav, she said yes, not out of love, but out of the deep hope that stability might one day lead to something warmer. Arav was decent, handsome, polite, well-settled. He didn't drink, didn't raise his voice, and on paper, he was the kind of man women were told to feel lucky for. But paper doesn't hold warmth, and Mira had begun to feel the cold. Their marriage was quiet. Too quiet. Arav worked long hours and rarely spoke unless it was necessary. He'd eat the dinner she prepared with mechanical gratitude, compliment her occasionally when prompted by others, and sleep beside her without ever truly being close. She'd try, of course, asking about his day, wearing colors he liked, placing little notes in his briefcase just to make him smile. But the notes came back unread. And slowly, Mira stopped leaving them altogether. Still, she didn't complain. She'd wake early, make his tea just right, manage the house without error, and smile politely at the relatives who called her lucky. But behind her quiet eyes was a loneliness so deep, she feared it would one day drown her. On rainy afternoons, she'd sit by the living room window, her fingers wrapped around a warm cup of tea, and watch the sky blur into gray. The world outside looked how she felt inside, soft, heavy, and constantly on the verge of tears. Then came the unexpected call. Arav's father, Rajan Singh, had suffered a minor stroke. Though he was recovering, his memory was faltering. The doctor insisted he shouldn't live alone anymore. Arav, being the only son, agreed to bring him home. Mira nodded, of course. It was her duty. She prepared the guest room, adjusted the routine, and welcomed the old man with folded hands and a gentle smile. What she didn't expect was how his arrival would start to awaken something inside her that had been asleep for far too long. Rajan was nothing like Arav. Where Arav was logical and withdrawn, Rajan was observant and poetic. Even in silence, he seemed to notice everything, the way Mira bit her lip while cooking, how she hummed old songs without realizing, how her eyes lingered on the rain for longer than necessary. He spoke rarely at first, but when he did, his words were dipped in memory, like he was always speaking to someone who wasn't there. "I used to love the rain too," he said one afternoon, seated near her by the window. "It reminded me of a woman I never quite let go of." Mira looked at him, startled. Not because of what he said, but because he had said it to her. No one had shared something that vulnerable with her in years. Arav hadn't noticed her love for rain in all their months together, but Rajan did. And something about that stirred her. Softly, secretly. From that day on, their interactions changed. They didn't speak often, but when they did, it felt like sharing tiny parts of themselves that had been hidden too long. A story from his youth. A recipe she'd never cooked for Arav. A song he used to dance to. Nothing crossed a line, but the warmth was unmistakable. Unspoken. Dangerous. And so, in the calm of Mira's carefully constructed life, a quiet storm began to rise. Not loud, not wild, but real. more real than anything she had felt in a long time. What she didn't know was that this was only the beginning. Her life had been peaceful until now. There was something about Rajan Singh that Meera couldn't quite explain. At first glance, he was just an aging man recovering from illness, polite, soft-spoken, a little forgetful. But the more time she spent around him, the more she noticed that behind his silver hair and calm demeanor were eyes that held an ocean of stories. His gaze often drifted, not toward things, but toward memories, ones that seemed to follow him into every quiet corner of the house. Unlike Arav, Rajan paid attention, not just to her actions, but to the emotion behind them. When Meera placed a cushion on his chair, he didn't just thank her. He smiled in a way that said he understood why she chose the softest one. When she served him dinner, he noticed the way she set the plate down gently, as if she was offering more than just food. Maybe comfort, maybe care. One evening, as the two of them sat near the window during another rainy spell, Rajan spoke without looking at her. "Do you know what I regret most in life?" he asked, voice barely louder than the rain tapping on the glass. Meera turned to him, unsure if it was a question meant for her or just a thought floating out into the room. "I once loved someone, the way poems love silence," he continued, deeply, and without noise. "But I never got to keep her." Meera said nothing, but his words hit something inside her. She, too, had loved quietly. She had given so much of herself, her time, her tenderness, her yearning, to a man who never noticed. Arav wasn't cruel. He just wasn't there. Not in the ways that mattered. That night, as she lay in bed beside her husband, Meera turned to him, searching for some trace of connection. Arav was asleep, his back to her, unaware of the storm slowly growing in the heart of the woman lying inches away. She stared at the ceiling, wondering if this was all marriage was ever going to be, an arrangement of convenience where the heart was never consulted. Over the next few days, her moments with Rajan grew in frequency, and strangely, in comfort. They cooked together sometimes. Simple meals, but with laughter that didn't feel forced. He told her more about his past, how his love story had been buried under family expectations, how he'd watched the woman he loved marry someone else while he stood by, powerless. Meera listened, not just because it was a story worth hearing, but because it mirrored the kind of quiet heartbreak she herself lived with every day. One afternoon, as she placed a steaming cup of tea in front of him, Rajan looked up at her with that same searching gaze. "You have that same sadness," he said softly. "The kind that doesn't make noise but never goes away." Meera felt a lump in her throat. She wanted to speak, to deny it, to smile politely like she always did. But she couldn't, because it was true. For the first time, someone had said it out loud. She was lonely, not just in a room or in a day, but in her soul. Then, just as she was about to turn away, Rajan whispered something that made her blood freeze. "If I were a younger man," he said, eyes steady on hers, "I would never let someone like you feel so alone." Meera didn't know what to say. The air between them had shifted. It wasn't just respect anymore. It wasn't even just care. Something deeper was forming. Something neither of them had asked for. but could no longer ignore. And as the rain continued outside, Mira felt the line between duty and desire begin to blur. Mira couldn't stop hearing those words. "If I were a younger man, I would never let someone like you feel so alone." They echoed in her mind long after they were spoken, quietly haunting her. She told herself it was just an old man's nostalgia, a moment of weakness, a passing comment. But her heart knew better. That sentence had stirred something deep inside her. A part of her she had kept buried for years, a longing to be seen, to be wanted, not just needed. She began avoiding long conversations with Rajan, keeping her replies short, her tone distant. But it didn't change the way her heart raced when she heard his footsteps near the kitchen, or how her eyes instinctively searched for him whenever she walked into a room. There was a warmth growing between them, something wordless and dangerous. They both felt it, and yet neither of them spoke of it again. Arav, as always, was busy. His phone was glued to his hand, his laptop rarely closed. He noticed less and less, and Mira had stopped trying to make him see. Their marriage existed in routine. Good mornings, packed lunches, quiet dinners, but no real connection, no real presence. She once tried to tell him about how lonely she felt, but he had brushed it off gently, distractedly. "You overthink things, Mira. Everything is fine." Everything was not fine. One night, while Arav was away on another business trip, the power went out during a rainstorm. The house fell into soft darkness. Rajan found her in the living room, lighting candles. Without speaking, he sat beside her. For a while, they listened to the rain, the silence between them heavy but strangely comforting. Mira broke it first. "This is dangerous," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "What is this, whatever it is that's happening between us?" Rajan didn't deny it. He didn't act confused. Instead, he looked at her with the kind of clarity that hurt. "I know," he said gently, "but feelings don't care about rules. They come when they want, and sometimes they remind us we're still alive." Tears welled up in Mira's eyes. She hated how right he was. She hated how much she wanted someone to say those exact words. She had spent years being the good wife, the dutiful daughter-in-law, the quiet woman who asked for nothing. And now, when someone finally saw her, truly saw her, it was the one person she could never allow herself to love. As she wiped her eyes, quickly, trying to hold on to her composure, she felt something brush her hand. His fingers just lightly, barely there. A simple touch. But it was enough to send a wave of guilt and warmth through her chest. Just then, the front door opened. Arav was home, earlier than expected. He stood there for a moment, rain dripping from his coat, eyes scanning the scene. The two of them sitting close, candlelight flickering. The stillness between them charged with something unspoken. Mira quickly stood, her heart pounding, her hand slipping away from Rajan's. Arav didn't say anything. He didn't shout or question. He simply looked at them both and walked past. The silence that followed was unbearable. That night, Mira lay awake, her body beside Arav, but her mind miles away. Had he noticed? Did he know? And most importantly, was she becoming someone she no longer recognized? Outside, the storm had passed, But inside Mira, something had just begun. The morning after Arav came home early, the house felt different. Heavier, colder, like something unspoken had shifted the air. Mira moved around the kitchen in silence, her hands performing the familiar rhythm of breakfast making, but her mind was tangled. Arav didn't say anything about the night before, and that silence scared her more than any confrontation ever could. He sat at the table with his usual coffee, scrolling through his phone as if nothing had happened. But Mira noticed the way he avoided her eyes, the way he didn't touch the toast she made, the way his fingers tightened slightly around his mug. Rajan wasn't in the room yet, and that absence only made everything feel more exposed. Mira wanted to explain. She wanted to say it wasn't what it looked like. But what was it? What name could she give to what had been growing in the quiet corners of the house between her and Rajan? She hadn't crossed a line. Not physically. But emotionally? Emotionally, she was already somewhere she didn't know how to come back from. Later that day, Rajan came into the kitchen while she was cleaning. He didn't smile. He didn't speak like he usually did. He simply stood there for a moment before softly saying, "He knows." Mira's hands froze on the plate she was drying. "He didn't say anything," she whispered. "He doesn't need to." Some truths speak louder when left unsaid. Rajan's voice was calm, but his eyes were filled with sorrow, perhaps for her, perhaps for himself, or maybe for a line they had both tiptoed too close to. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she said, not looking at him. "I know," he replied. "Neither did I." They both knew something had to change, and yet neither of them made the first move to pull away. The feelings that had grown between them weren't born of lust or rebellion. They had formed in the soft spaces of being unseen, untouched, unloved. But knowing where they came from didn't make them any less dangerous. That evening, Arav came home early again. But this time, he sat down across from Mira without his phone, without distraction. He studied her. Really studied her. "Are you in love with him?" he asked, his voice flat but steady. Mira felt like the breath had been knocked out of her. The question hung in the air like smoke. "No," she said after a long pause. It was the truth. She wasn't in love with Rajan, but what she felt was something far more complicated, something between longing and recognition. "But I feel things I shouldn't," she admitted quietly. Arav looked away, as if her honesty hurt more than a lie ever could. "I never meant to make you feel alone," he said, his voice low. "I just didn't know how to be anything more than what I am." "You don't have to be anything more," she said, tears threatening her eyes. "You just have to see me." For the first time in months, maybe ever, Arav reached for her hand. It was hesitant, unsure, but it was real. Mira looked at him, trying to find the man she had married beneath the surface of habit and distance. That night, she sat alone in the dark, staring out at the moonlit sky, her heart torn between two silences, the one she shared with her husband, and the one that had bloomed with his father. She didn't know which one would break her first. Mira had always thought the hardest part of love was losing it, but now she understood. It was never having it fully, and then being asked to walk away from the one place it started to feel real. After that night's conversation with Arav, something between them began to shift. He was more present, more attentive. He even took a day off work to spend time at home. And yet, it all felt like too little, too late. She appreciated his effort, how he now lingered at the table a bit longer, asked about her day, watched her with careful eyes. But the gap between them wasn't built in a day, and it couldn't be erased by a few kind gestures. It was years of being unseen, years of silence, of trying and being met with emotional absence. Now that he was showing up, Mira felt confused, guilty, even. Because a part of her didn't want to be rescued anymore. A part of her had already started to move on. From her marriage. From the version of herself who waited and hoped. And then there was Rajan. Since their last conversation, he had kept his distance. Their shared silences were now replaced with polite nods and short greetings. It should have made things easier, but instead, it made the house colder. Mira missed the strange comfort of their quiet companionship, the way he saw her without trying, the way he made her feel like a woman, not just a wife. One afternoon, Mira found Rajan sitting in the backyard alone, eyes closed, face tilted toward the sun. For a moment, she just watched him. This man who had somehow become the only person who ever looked past her role and into her heart. She walked over slowly, unsure of what to say. He opened his eyes and gave her a soft, sad smile. "You don't have to explain anything," he said, before she could speak. "Whatever it was, it's over. It has to be." "I know," she whispered, sitting beside him. "But it still hurts." He nodded. "It does, because what we found, even in its silence, was real." That acknowledgement brought tears to her eyes. She turned away, ashamed of the emotion she couldn't hide anymore. Rajan didn't touch her, didn't move closer. He simply said, "Some people enter our lives just to remind us of what we deserve, even if we can't keep them." That night, Mira told Arav she wanted space, not separation, not divorce, just room to breathe, room to understand herself again, to figure out if the pieces of their marriage could truly be rebuilt, or if she was just clinging to what once seemed safe. Arav looked heartbroken, but didn't argue. He offered her something he had never given before: understanding. "Take the time," he said softly. "I want to try. But only if you want to, too." And for once, Mira felt like the decision was hers. Not an expectation, not a duty, but a choice. The next morning, she packed a small bag and left for her parents' home. As the car pulled out of the driveway, she caught a glimpse of Rajan standing at the balcony, watching her leave. He didn't wave. He didn't call out. But their eyes met. And in that brief moment, 1,000 unsaid words passed between them. "Thank you. Forgive me. Goodbye." Mira turned away quickly, holding back the tears. Some stories don't end with grand gestures or dramatic confessions. Some end in quiet departures, with the ache of what could have been and the hope of what might still come. But what none of them knew was that fate wasn't quite finished with this story yet. Weeks passed. Mira had never truly known silence until she returned to her childhood home. The walls felt familiar, the smells of old books and sandalwood calming. But it wasn't home. She wandered from room to room, trying to make sense of the woman she had become. Was she someone who had betrayed her vows? Or someone who had simply woken up from a long emotional slumber? Her mother noticed the quiet sadness behind her eyes, but didn't ask questions. Instead, she let Mira rest, heal, think. For the first time in years, Mira read books for pleasure. She watched the sunset from the terrace. She cried when no one was watching. And somewhere in that space of solitude, she found herself again. Not as Arav's wife or Rajan's confidant, but as Mirada Arav called, often. He didn't plead. He didn't pressure. He simply asked how she was. Slowly she began answering, not with silence but with small truths. "I'm learning to sleep without feeling empty," she said once. He didn't reply right away, but she could hear him exhale softly, like someone accepting something they couldn't change. And then one day, everything changed. Arav called early in the morning. His voice was shaking. "Mira, it's Dad. He collapsed this morning. We're at the hospital." Mira's heart dropped. Without thinking, she grabbed her bag and rushed back. The ride felt endless. Her mind flooded with images of Rajan, his quiet smile, the way he looked at her like she mattered, the regret in his eyes when he said goodbye. When she reached the hospital, she found Arav sitting alone outside the ICU, face buried in his hands. He looked up, and when he saw her, something in him broke. "He's stable now. They say it was a minor stroke," he said. "But it scared me, Mira. I thought I'd lose him without ever forgiving him." Mira sat beside him, placing a hand over his. For the first time, there was no blame, no guilt, just shared grief, shared humanity. They went in to see Rajan together. He looked weaker, paler, but his eyes still held that quiet fire. When he saw Mira, his lips trembled into a faint smile. She walked to his side, sat beside him, and took his hand, without shame this time. Not with the passion of a forbidden love, but with the tenderness of someone saying thank you. "You came back," he whispered. "I never really left," she replied. "You gave me something I'd forgotten I needed. Myself." Rajan's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time so did Arav's. There, in that quiet hospital room, something beautiful happened. Not loud, not dramatic, but real. Healing. Over the next few days, Mira stayed, not out of duty but choice. She helped care for Rajan, but she also spoke to Arav, not just about groceries or family, but about life, dreams, fears. They talked about where things went wrong and where they still might go right. One evening, as they watched Rajan sleep, Arav turned to her and asked, "Do you think we can still find our way back?" Mira thought for a moment, then nodded. "Only if we walk toward each other. Not just out of habit, but with intention." And so, they began again. Slowly, carefully. Mira never forgot Rajan. Not the emotion he stirred, not the kindness he showed. Not the way he taught her that love wasn't always about possession. Sometimes it was about awakening something you thought was lost. And in the quiet corners of her heart, where longing once lived, she carried gratitude instead. Because sometimes the most unexpected people show us who we are, and sometimes that changes everything.